Andrew Pearson, you're under arrest." Those were the first words I understood since I had been knocked to the floor. My arms were yanked painfully behind my back and handcuffed so tight that I thought my hands were being cut off. I had gone to answer the front door, but as soon as I opened it, I was bowled over by at least 4 uniformed officers barging into my house. I was roughly dragged to my feet as 3 more people in civilian suits walked into my house. "Mr. Pearson, this is a warrant to search the premises," said one gray-haired man, snapping a piece of paper in front of my face. "Get him out of here!" "Wait!" I yelled, struggling to get free of the hands that were holding me. "There must be some mistake." I didn't get to say anything more as I was spun around to smash into the front door jamb. My glasses went flying. "That's resisting arrest, pervert!" hissed the officer who had slammed me into the jam. "Hey!" admonished the first man. "Just get him down to booking to be processed." A million thoughts raced through my mind as I was literally thrown into the back of a police car. My main concern was for my 2 kids, Melody, age 12, and Tony, age 11. The officer who had spun me around into the wall sat down in the driver's seat, buckled up, and started driving away from my home. "Look," I said, sitting up in the back seat and wincing from the pain in my wrists. "My kids will be home soon from school. You don't need anything but to shut your big fat mouth," snarled the officer. "These are my kids," I yelled. The next thing I knew, I was slamming into the heavy grill that separated the front seat from the back seat. There's a principle in physics that says an object in motion tends to stay in motion. In other words, I was traveling along at 35 miles per hour when the cop jammed on his brakes until the grill stopped my forward momentum. What I learned later involved mass and velocity. The cop turned round in his seat and said, "Look, scumbag, one more word out of you and I'll come back there and beat you to death. By the way, my body cam is turned off." I had managed to turn my head so my nose wasn't broken, but my right cheek was beginning to swell. I stayed quiet until we reached the station. Pulling into the prisoner's garage, the officer locked up his weapon before yanking me out of the car and into the booking area. A female officer was standing there waiting for us. "Paperwork?" she asked just before the other officer handed it over to her. "What happened to him?" "Resisting arrest," said the first officer as he put leg irons on me. She shrugged as if it was no big deal. I gasped in relief after she took off the handcuffs. After taking my front and side pictures and scanning my fingerprints, she started asking me questions. "Height?" 6 feet, I replied. "Weight?" 210, I replied. "Charges?" "I don't know. No one told me what they are." With a sigh of exasperation, she grabbed the papers she had been given and began leafing through them. I saw her face turn white and then beet red. Marching over to a cell door, she threw it open and pointed inside. "May I make a phone call first?" I asked. She pointed to the phone on the wall and said, "1." I called the law firm that handles my company's business. I studied mechanical engineering in college and invented 2 medical clamps that took off. I rented out the patents until I could build my own manufacturing company. It gave me and my family a nice low to mid 6-figure income. I don't feel the need to gouge those in the business who need the clamps. While I don't deny myself luxuries, I don't feel the need to live like a Rockefeller or an overpaid sports hero. Riley, Gordon, and Martin. "Hello, this is Drew Pearson. Is Jerry Crane in?" "Please hold." I listened to elevator music for about 30 seconds before the line was picked up. "Mr. Pearson? Jonathan Riley here." "Oh, I was expecting Jerry, Mr. Riley. I've been arrested and need help." "Mr. Pearson, I regret to inform you that our firm cannot represent you. It is a conflict of interest." "Conflict of interest?" I lost it. "You're my goddamn firm." "I'm afraid not, Mr. Pearson." And the phone went dead. I turned to see the female officer standing beside the cell room door. "Get in," she ordered. Confused but unwilling to confront her, I shuffled in my leg cuffs into the room. She slammed the door behind me. I watched as she headed back to her workstation, taking in deep breaths to calm herself down. It was several hours before I was taken in front of a county commissioner who would set my initial bail. It was from her that I learned what I was charged with. "Solicitation of a minor?" I yelled as I leaped to my feet. A heavy hand from the transportation officer on my shoulder forced me back into my seat. "What the hell? I would never do anything like that." "Sir, I am not here to determine guilt or innocence, only bail. The charge is a felony, punishable by 10 years in jail and/or a $25,000 fine if you are found guilty. Bail is set at $500,000. You can post the bail yourself by cash or real property. You can hire a bail bondsman who will charge you 10% of the total amount. If you cannot post bail, you will appear before a judge tomorrow morning for a bail review. He can raise, lower, or keep the bail the same." After being returned to the precinct, I spent the next several hours calling everyone I could think of. My wife Chastity's phone had been disconnected. No one was at work. I knew I had over $600,000 in a savings account. The house was completely paid for, and I also had my business, both of which I could put up for collateral. I wasn't ready to crank out 50 G's to a bondsman for what was an obvious mistake. I managed to get a couple of hours of sleep before I was awakened for breakfast in a box and a small bottle of orange juice. I couldn't get back on the phone because another prisoner was using it. In a short while, myself and 3 other prisoners were on our way to the district court. We were locked into a holding cell in the basement of that building. "Pearson!" shouted an officer. "Someone here to see you." "Yes?" I asked as I approached the cell door. "Andrew Pearson?" asked a young woman. "Yes, I am," I replied. "You've been served. Deputy?" "Mr. Pearson, this is a restraining order. You are hereby ordered to stay 500 feet away from Chastity Pearson, Melody Pearson, and Anthony Pearson. You are also ordered to stay the same distance away from Chastity Pearson's place of business and residence. The order also includes the children's schools. Do you understand the order?" I understood, but couldn't comprehend it. I barely remember signing the order. Opening the first envelope finished and coherent thoughts I had. They were papers for a limited divorce. In our state, a limited divorce is a legal separation. A final divorce wouldn't be granted until both parties had lived apart for 12 months. The restraining order had been drawn up last night. I was numb. I panicked when I realized that I may never see Melody or Tony again. Chastity had initiated both sets of papers. I knew we were going through a rough patch, but this just floored me. I met her in our junior year at college. I had already invented my clamps, but wasn't making any money off them. We married after we graduated at the young age of 22. Now at 36, my life was exploding with all the force of a supernova. At the bail review, things got worse. The prosecutor added the charges of possession of child pornography and resisting arrest. Shouting that I was innocent and that this was all a mistake ticked off the judge. My bail was denied, and I was taken to the county jail pending trial. Pedophiles have it rough in jail. I was bumped, knocked down, punched, and kicked. I was lucky I wasn't raped or killed, but that was only because I was locked alone in my cell for most of the time, and I had a guard escort when I went to the bathroom. I contacted lawyers both for my trial and my divorce. The top 10 lawyers I talked to stated that Chastity had been to see them about the divorce and that they couldn't talk to me without it being a conflict of interest. A defense team was interested up to a point. It turned out that all of my bank accounts had been emptied and closed. I learned through them that my business and patents had been placed in trust to my children by a family court judge after my arrest, and the pending charges had been splashed all over the media. Chastity had used an old, but still valid, power of attorney to remove my name from the deed to our house. In other words, I was flat broke, except for the $52.26 that I had in my wallet when I was arrested. I did manage to find a couple of free lawyers to try and get my money back, but they ran for the hills when the law firm of Riley, Gordon, and Martin showed them the error of their ways. That and the fact that they really didn't want to be seen working for a pedophile. I spent all my time in jail cursing chastity and everyone else who dropped me like a hot potato. After about a month in jail, my court date came up. It was a farce. I met my overworked, very young, brand new to the bar public defender for the first time about 30 minutes before my trial started. He looked at the charging documents and the evidence and told me I was screwed. He did say it in legalese, so it sounded better, but the meaning was the same. During the trial, it was stated that I had gone online and made friends with a 13-year-old girl, Jane Doe. I had tried to get her to meet with me for inappropriate reasons. She, of course, told her mother, who reported it to the police. The judge had been informed that the girl was severely traumatized, and he excused her from appearing in court. There were also 162 pictures of underage girls downloaded to my computer and stored on a flash drive that I was supposed to have hidden away in my sock drawer. I pleaded innocent, but was found guilty. The judge gave me 10 years, but since this was my first offense, he suspended 5 of those years and had the child pornography sentence run concurrent with the solicitation. Oh, he also ordered psychiatric counseling and that I would be placed on the sexual offender registry. To say I was scared shitless would be an understatement. With nothing but time on my hands in the county jail, I worked out. However, even being in a more muscular physique than before I was arrested, I knew I was in for a rough 5 years. At the state penitentiary, I was given my orange jumpsuit and shown to my cell block, which would be my new home for a while. I was sitting at a table in the cell block composing a letter to Melody and Tony. I had written to them every other day while at the jail, but received nothing back from them. They were never brought by to visit. In fact, none of my old friends or acquaintances had been by to see me. As I was writing, I was surprised to see an older man around 60 with a white goatee sit down opposite me. He looked at me quizzically, turning his head from side to side before saying, "I don't see it." I looked behind me, but no one was sneaking up on me. "See what?" "What's so special about you?" he replied. "Just before you arrived, a pissant lawyer with a bald head came here. He promised pro bono work to the Aryans, blacks, chinks, and even those crazy MS-13 shits if they left you alone. Hell, even the warden came down to tell us to stay away from you. So what makes you so special?" "Nothing that I know of," I said. I did feel a little bit of joy. The only bald-headed lawyer I knew was Jerry Crane. I held out my hand. "Drew Pearson." The man looked at my hand, but made no move. "I know your name." "All right, tell me your story." I told him everything from the arrest to ending up here. I explained how I had no wife, no kids, no money, no house, no business, no patents, no life, and was supposed to be a pedophile. "Supposed to be?" he asked. "The court found me guilty," I said softly. "I have no idea where the evidence they used against me comes from. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who does that to a child should have his banana cut off and shoved so far up his bum it'll need to be surgically removed." You know, I almost believe you. I'm Mason Boat. I'm a lifer. The next 3 years were unpleasant, but I managed to survive. My cellmate, Boat, was the unofficial arbitrator inside the prison. While I wasn't his friend, I was an acquaintance, which offered me some protection. I was punched and shoved into walls, but that was just the normal harassment given to a loner. As a labeled pedo, I couldn't join any gang and wasn't allowed to mix with the general pop. That's the term for the normal thieves, muggers, and criminals. I was still doing better than the real child molesters. 3 died and another is a quadriplegic. No one came to visit me. I received letters from my parents, but they were the, "We're fine, but how could you?" variety. Mom and Dad were still my parents, but they couldn't reconcile themselves to what I had been convicted of. My older brother and younger sister had dropped me completely with restraining orders to stay away from them and their kids. I had heard through the prison grapevine that Jerry was stopping by 2 to 3 times a month to do free legal work for some of the inmates. It was rumored that he had been in to see the warden each time to check up on me. The boat was the one who clued me in on life in the pen. After moping around for the first month, he had a guy slam me up against the wall and hold me there as he read me the riot act. You miss your kids? Get over it. You're angry at your situation. Get over it. You're down in the dumps because your life sucks. Get over it. You're making yourself a target. I listened. I started to exercise and train in self-defense. That stopped the majority of the bullying that was sent my way. I studied and took classes at the prison library. I even taught some classes on engineering. Chastity divorced me a year to the day after I had been arrested. The papers were delivered to me right after the hearing. She had gotten the ultra-feminist Wicked Witch of the East as the judge. The alimony and child support payments were based on what I had earned when I owned my own business and the patents. Since I was a felon in prison, the judge felt that I didn't need any money, and all my assets were forfeited. What really killed me was the order that since I was a registered sex offender, there was to be no contact or visitation in regard to my children. She also threw in that if I was ever released, any and all wages were to be garnished. 2 days after the divorce hearing, I was slammed up against the wall by 2 huge prisoners while Boat looked on. Now that I have your attention, said Boat, lose the attitude. You got screwed, fucked, and humiliated by the divorce judge. I've never seen anyone get it so bad. However, all that anger is leaking out and it's starting to piss people off. You can't afford to piss people off. What did I tell you when you first got here? I need to survive, I replied. Very good. That advice goes for outside of here as well as inside. I'll let you in on a little something I've heard. This prison is overcrowded. To relieve the crunch, a number of non-violent prisoners are being granted early parole. You're scheduled for next year if you survive. I survived. Barely. I was knifed by a new inmate who had been abused as a small child. I was then paroled. I know most of you out there think that now that I was paroled, this was the time to get my revenge. Try it when you are a registered sex offender assigned to a halfway house run by a sadistic counselor, and the only job you can get is a nighttime janitor in a large office building. An MBA and master's in engineering doesn't mean shit when you are labeled as a pedo. Boat came through for me just before I was released. He told me that Chastity had married Stephen Huntington, who was going to be made a partner at the law firm of Riley, Gordon, and Martin. It cost me a carton of cigarettes to get their new home address. The second day after I was released, I was in the park across from their condo building after I had gotten off of work. I barely recognized him when my son, Tony, now 13, came out of the building. He had shot up at least 8 inches and had lost all of his baby fat. To me, he looked positively skinny. There was no mistaking Melody. At 15, with her long brunette hair down to her waist, she was the spitting image of her mother. The two of them hopped into a small white bus and were gone as I wiped the tears from my eyes. It became a ritual for me to be there every morning to see them get on the buses that took them to their private school. 4 months after I had checked into the halfway house, 2 parolees sought to give me a pounding for being a pervert. I put them both into the hospital and got kicked out. Luckily, I had done a favor for another guy there, and he spoke up to my parole officer when he came by to investigate. I managed to hold on to my job, but had to live on the streets or in shelters, subsidizing my meals with food stamps and at soup kitchens. It's a wonder I just didn't kill myself. Well, even the cheapest gun was well beyond my means, with most of my pay being sent to my ex-wife. Alcohol, drugs, slashing my wrists, all were viable options, but I remembered that I needed to survive. The one thing that gave me the strength to do so was that 10 to 15 second window of time when I could see my children. For them, I could endure. Too many other people wanted to send me back to the pen. Days became weeks, weeks became years. I tried on time early on to get the divorce decree changed using a pro bono lawyer. Jonathan Riley ruined him so badly that he is to leave the state. No one would touch my appeal on my conviction. During one of my required visits, my parole officer warned me that there was a private investigator asking around about me. I was suddenly glad that I was homeless. Patterns changed in my kids' lives, and I found new places to watch them during the day. Sometimes it was just a glimpse of them in a car being driven somewhere. A lot of times they played in the park with their friends. I was always careful not to get too close and violate some distance rule that would land me back in the pen. One fall day, when Tony was a high school senior and Melody had just left home for her first year at Harvard, I was sitting in the park watching Tony walk over to his school bus. He looked over at the park and slowed to a stop. He stared at me for half a second and gave me a tentative wave before stepping onto the bus. I was shocked. There was no way he could have recognized me. I still worked out and had lost at least 40 pounds since my arrest. I had a full beard and cut my own hair with electric clippers that I charged up at work. I was scruffy looking, but it saved me money that I could afford to spend on haircuts and shaves. I had an agreement with the manager of the office building to use their restrooms to get cleaned up. I didn't need complaints about my appearance or personal hygiene. For the rest of the school year, Tony would give me a wave every now and then. I realized he did not recognize me as his father, but as only a familiar guy who sat alone in the park each morning. Then came an incident that scared me half to death. "Hey, mister, mind if I join you?" Tony was standing by my bench, and I hadn't even seen him approach. I looked around quickly for Chastity and the cops, but no one was nearby. Tony's expression was sour, so I indicated that he could sit down. "You seem down in the mouth? Girl problems?" I asked in a gravelly voice to try to disguise it. "How did you know?" Tony asked in astonishment. I chuckled. "No disrespect, but at your age that is what it is 90% of the time. My girl and I just broke up. She doesn't like that I've been dating other girls on the side. My dad said not to worry about it. There are other fish in the sea, but I cared about her." "Do you want my opinion even if you won't like it?" I asked. "Why should I want your opinion?" asked Tony defensively. "Because you're out here talking to me about it instead of your mother or father." Tony seemed to collapse in on himself. "Dad keeps telling me that a man doesn't need to listen to his women. They're only good for one thing. A man needs to be a man. Mom rarely talks to me." "A man does have to be a man, but he is judged by what he says and does. Were you and that girl exclusive?" I asked. She thought you two were, but you weren't. She trusted you, and you broke that trust, which had to hurt her badly." Tony stood up abruptly. "Hey, I told you that you wouldn't like what I had to say. You lost her love and trust. Respect for and from others is everything." "My dad has respect from others," stated Tony. "Examine the statement you just made. Try reading a couple of Louis L'Amour books. Concentrate on how the main characters act. You can't go wrong by trying to follow a good example." "What about my girl?" he asked. "Did you treat her right?" Tony hung his head down and shook it from side to side. "Read a couple of those books, and I'm sure you'll figure it out." It was a week later when I found a book, The Rider of Lost Creek, on my bench. The note inside stated that he had apologized to the girl, but she wouldn't get back together with him. He went on to say he now knew it was all his fault, and he was working to better himself. Time flew by after that, and Tony then left to go to Johns Hopkins University. Years went by, and my sightings of my children became less frequent. I still sat in the park each morning. It had become too much of a ritual to stop. Dating was out of the question with my being on the sex offenders register. Money was still being withheld from my pay, and I knew it was worthless to try to fight. I never saw Chastity or her husband, Stephen. Every once in a while, I would get to see Melody or Tony for a few seconds when they came by the condo to visit. The year I turned 50 was when a freezing rain had caught me outside and unprotected. As I left work, sweating, freezing, hot, and chilled all over, the weather had turned from sleet to snow. A wet, hacking cough racked my body and I could barely breathe. My mind was fuzzy, so I was really surprised when I looked around and found myself sitting on the park bench with 6 inches of snow on the ground, and more coming down. I saw Tony coming out of the condo building and he waved to me. I lifted my arm to wave back and collapsed to the ground. Mister? You okay? I looked up to see Tony looking back at me. My eyes rolled back in my head and I lost focus. Then a hand was placed on my forehead. Shit, you're burning up! Come on! We have to get you inside! Tony somehow managed to pull me to my feet. As we started walking, I stopped and pointed. Cart! We'll get it later, he said firmly. I thought my heart was going to burst with pride at how well he had grown into manhood. That was just before a coughing fit almost put me back on my knees. What's going on, Mr. Huntington? Asked the doorman. Call an ambulance, ordered Tony. He's soaked all the way through. Do we have any towels or blankets around here? There's a blanket in the closet. I'll get it. Tony laid me down on the carpet, and I heard the sound of high heels clacking on the marble floor. A feminine voice asked, Robert, what are you doing with that man? It's the old guy who sits in the park, answered Tony. He's collapsed. It feels like he has a really high fever and his clothes are soaked. I think he might be homeless. A vision of loveliness appeared before my eyes and I gasped out, Chastity! That would be my mother, she said in a wary tone. Do we know you? They're asking if he has any ID, said the doorman, putting his hand over his phone. Hang on, said Tony, who started to pat down my janitor's uniform. Robert, exclaimed Melody. You're not really going to search him? You don't know what he has. There could be needles there. Oh, get a grip, sis, scoffed Tony. His hair is cut. He's wearing a clean uniform and... Ah, here it is! He pulled my security badge out of my pocket and looked at it. His face went white. I suddenly realized how close I was to him and Melody. I had to get away before the police came. I managed to roll onto my side before my coughing made me too weak to move. The only thing I could do was to flop back with my head spinning. Melody snatched the badge out of Tony's weak grip. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken by my lapels like a rag doll. You bastard! Screamed Melody. You dare to show your face around here. Why aren't you dead? You left us. You abandoned us. Didn't want to, baby girl. Was forced to, and everything went dark. 4 weeks later, Chastity Huntington strode off the elevator on the 30th floor. It was the main reception area for the law firm of Reilly, Gordon, and Martin. She looked like $1 million, or at least $250,000 if you just counted the jewelry she was wearing. The long black formal gown set off the diamond necklace and earrings perfectly. It was just before 7 in the evening, and while there were still associates and paralegals hurrying around, there was no one at the reception desk to greet her. Huffing in exasperation and adjusting the wrap draped over her arms, she turned and signaled for her bodyguard to remain where he was. Heading down the hallway, Chastity caught sight of herself in the ornamental mirrors, and she smiled. Her figure was very nearly what it was when she was in college. The only thing that had changed was that her cup size went from a B to a C from having 2 children. Walking past several offices that belonged to partners, she turned and walked into the common area where the associate cubicles were located. Frowning, she saw the light was on at one cubicle, and she headed over to it. Melody, you're not even dressed, admonished Chastity. You know what this dedication means to your father. It's another big step towards his being made a named partner. Melody looked up from the stack of papers on her desk and said, Mother, I asked you here under the pretense of getting a ride to the dedication. I wanted you here to ask you what really happened. What really happened? Repeated Chastity in confusion. Happened to what? I don't understand. What really happened to my biological father? She asked. Chastity's eyes widened as she sharply drew in a deep breath. Her face then screwed up in anger. I will not discuss that person ever! Melody stood up quickly to prevent her mother from leaving. Mother, it's been 14 years. I know what he was convicted of and that he received a 10-year sentence. I'm your daughter, not your lawyer. I'd like to know. She insisted. Know what? That man tried to get a 13-year-old girl to be intimate with him? That he never once wrote to you or your brother, Robert? Didn't even call either of you. He abandoned all of us? All of us, stated Melody flatly. She started to pull papers from off the top of her desk. Sit down, Mother. Let's take a look at what he was accused of. Take a look at what? Asked Chastity. Let's first look at the solicitation emails. There are 24 total emails, 16 from my biological father, and 8 from that girl. The contents of the emails are graphic enough to warrant a charge of solicitation. And there you have it. His conviction was justifiable. Let's stop this nonsense and go to the dedication. Chastity replied. The problem I ran into was when I checked on the dates of those emails, continued Melody, as if she had not heard her mother. 8 of the 16 emails sent to the girl were sent when my biological father was in Houston doing a presentation at a medical conference. I checked. He was there the entire time. He couldn't have sent them. He could have sent them from his laptop or cell phone, pointed out Chastity. We don't need to dredge all of this unpleasantness back up. He couldn't have sent them from his laptop or cell phone, argued Melody with a puzzled look on her face. All 16 emails were sent from our home computer, which begs the question of who sent them. As a matter of fact, 2 of the emails were sent when he was in Houston, and you had taken Tony and I to summer camp. Chastity opened her mouth, but Melody held up her hand to stop her from talking. The girl never testified in court, continued Melody. In fact, I cannot find her name in any police reports or any indication that the police interviewed her at all. I do know that as a juvenile, the records would have been sealed, but there should have been some indication that the police contacted her and her parents. Another strange thing was the child pornography that was downloaded to our home computer. All of it was downloaded on a single day within 15 minutes and on a day when he was at work, which was verified by the security tapes at his office. These puzzling things should have been brought out at his trial, but he was assigned a brand new, inexperienced, overwhelmed public defender. Melody, leave it alone, Chastity asked. Why should I leave it alone, Mother? It was 14 years ago. There is nothing we can do to change the past. Chastity replied. What I want is to know what really happened, said Melody firmly. I remember seeing you and Daddy Dearest Stephen hanging all over each other at several parties we had. You two would also disappear off somewhere together. Tony and I saw it and didn't like it, but we were too young to understand what was going on or to say something about it. Why do you think we never warmed up to him? I also found out that the hall for your and Stephen's wedding reception was reserved a month before the arrest. How do you know all that? Gasped Chastity in shock. You should have taken a page from Hillary Clinton's playbook and deleted your emails, replied Melody. The records of the reservation for the hall only took 1 phone call. Father was starting to look at hiring a private investigator. That's why the 2 of you did it, isn't it? Slumping down in the chair, Chastity said, That man was sitting on a gold mine, and nothing I said could convince him to maximize the potential of his patents. I complained to Stephen about it one day at work, and it was like we totally understood one another. He was an associate, and I was a paralegal. We discussed my getting a divorce. That man would still have the patents in his name since they were developed before we were married. Stephen and I got together and we planned. And Chastity gave her daughter a sardonic look. We got together. We found we were much more compatible than that man and I ever were. She suddenly looked a little apprehensive before adding, We wanted to secure your and Robert's future. The way Andrew had it set up was a disaster waiting to happen. My brother's name used to be Tony before you changed it to Robert Huntington. Yes, because we couldn't have any stigma of being associated with that man. As it was, it took a couple of years before friends and family finally believed we had nothing to do with his activities. We did everything for the two of you. Stephen adopted both of you, and we sent you to the finest schools. Moodai's snort of derision cut her mother off. I believe Daddy Dearest adopted you because the patents and business were put in an unbreakable trust for Tony and I. Father did that just weeks before he was arrested. Neither Tony nor myself were encouraged to take any interest in the business. I was pushed towards the law and Tony towards medicine. It was the interest in those fields that you displayed in school that made us encourage you towards those fields, explained Chastity. Ah, school. I remember when right after Father's arrest, we moved from the old house to Stephen's condo. Tony and I were taking the school bus to the nearest public school for 2 months after that. One day, when we were doing our homework at the kitchen table, you and Mrs. Gordon returned from shopping. Mrs. Gordon asked how we liked our new school. I told her how overcrowded and run down it was. I remember her telling you that as the wife of a new partner, you should be more aware of how the school that her children attend reflects upon Stephen's standing in the firm and your own. I hated that snobby bitch, but she did get you to enroll us into Brightwood Academy the next day. That must have cost a pretty penny. It takes time for the enrollment process to occur to get you into one of those schools, stated Chastity. Yes, and that was also the year that you and Daddy Dearest Stephen went jet-setting around the world, leaving Tony and I here alone with a part-time housekeeper. She, at least, kept food in the condo. Those trips were necessary to build up Stephen's client base. I am sorry if you feel that you were neglected as a child. I was going to be tainted by that man's crimes and needed to get away from that. You were children, so it wouldn't have touched you, Chastity stated. It would have, if Daddy Dearest Stephen hadn't very quickly adopted us and changed our names, replied Melody. There were a ton of questions asked, and rumors were rampant at Brightwood about our name change. That year of being on our own for the most part made us self-reliant and leery of attachments. That is probably why neither of us have ever had a serious relationship. I got into Harvard and Harvard Law on my own merits, and with scholarships I earned. Tony followed my suit at Hopkins. You know, Tony and I may have never found out about the trust if it hadn't been for a chance circumstance. What do you mean? Asked Chastity nervously. We met someone. After that, we went digging and found the divorce decree along with the restraining order. Those documents really made Tony and I wonder about the business, so we started to really investigate everything. Did you know that the district attorney personally assigned that public defender who had to defend my father's case? The firm and the business both contributed heavily to his bid for governor, both over and under the table. Clyde Mullins, who was the general manager at the business, was promoted to CEO with a non-voting share of stock, and he jacked up the price on everything to 8 times what had been charged before. He reports directly to you, according to your emails. The old house and everything in it was sold. That money, along with all the savings and investments, was used to purchase Daddy Dearest Steve's junior partnership, with the caveat that he would be made full partner in 4 years' time. We found that letter of agreement long with another letter that stated that Riley, Gordon, and Martin would be the sole law firm for the business for the next 40 years. A hefty yearly retainer fee was also outlined, a fee that went way beyond what the business ever paid a lawyer before. Imagine our surprise when Tony and I found out that you, Daddy Dearest Stephen, and Jonathan Riley were the executors of our trust, and that we have not seen a dime of that money. Chastity stood up and looked down at her daughter. This has been an illuminating trip down memory lane, but it is all in the past, she said imperially. I have the dedication to get to, and it appears that you will not be coming with me. We have all done things that weren't legal, but it was to ensure our future. That man would not listen and had to be taken out of the picture. Tomorrow, Stephen and I, along with Jonathan Riley, will sit down and talk to you and Robert about it. In the meantime, do not do anything that would jeopardize yourself." "Jeopardize myself?" asked Melody incredulously. "Did you ever once wonder why I put a lock and deadbolt on my bedroom door? It was to keep Daddy Dearest Stephen out. Do you even care? The first night he came into my bedroom, I was lucky. He was naked and getting up on the bed when Tony followed him in and hit him between the legs with his lightsaber. It's a shame that it wasn't a real lightsaber." "I'm sure it was a bad dream you had," replied Chastity. "Don't do anything you will regret." "My only regret is that I didn't do this sooner, hopscotch," replied Melody. At that word, 2 men and a woman came out of an office. "Mommy Dearest, these are agents of the FBI. Since the governor will be implicated in this, we could not trust any state agency. You have confessed to a crime of evidence fabrication, and it has been recorded. There are signs all over this office about electronic recording. By now, Daddy Dearest Stephen, Jonathan Riley, and Clyde Mullins have been arrested. Also, the husband and wife of the 13-year-old who you paid $75,000 to make up those emails. You remember Muriel, my father's nice personal assistant who you had fired. She never trusts Clyde and tried her best to keep track of things in the company, even though she was not here. You wouldn't believe the stuff she uncovered. She, Tony, and our new CEO have spent the last 2 weeks going over the books. Jerry Crane is doing the same here, but he was ordered to by the IRS. In short, we closed all the offshore accounts where money siphoned from the business had been funneled into. All the business and trust accounts have been changed, and access has been severely restricted. Tony and I have closed all of our personal accounts and opened new ones. All the safety deposit boxes that had been set up in our names were emptied, and the contents moved under the scrutiny of the FBI. We have not touched Daddy Dearest Stephen or your accounts because we have no authority to do so, but I must tell you that the IRS has frozen all the personal accounts. The IRS is leaving the business accounts alone for 30 days pending an external audit. Melody fished a piece of paper off her desk and handed it to her mother. This is a court order stating that I have to return any and all of your property to the condo to be inventoried. I will need your necklace, earrings, and purse. Chastity didn't move until she was nudged by the female agent. She removed her jewelry and gave it to Melody, who placed it in the purse. You sent a good man to prison and labeled him a monster just to get rich, snarled Melody. You deprived me of my father for 14 years. According to a convict named Mason Boat, my father wrote to Tony and me every day. We never received a single one. I wonder what happened to the letters I sent him. No matter now. Father has been appointed as the new CEO, and, thanks to you, he has had time to develop quite a few new items that we are getting patents for. His appointment and all the arrests have been released to all the media. I've got congressmen and senators petitioning the president to give him a presidential pardon. Jerry Crane is already hard at work overturning his conviction and getting him off the sex offender registry. Melody picked up an envelope and handed it to her stunned mother. Congratulations! You are about to become the most hated woman in the world. I decided to be magnanimous. In the envelope is my own money that I am giving to you. It contains $52.26. The exact amount of money my father had when he went into prison. Spend it wisely. It is the only thing you will ever receive from me or Tony. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.